You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming on iTunes, Google Podcasts, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 72 of the DCAU Review. I am your host, Cal. With me as he is each and every episode, my good brother, the guy that runs our Twitter page, Liam. Liam, welcome back to the DCAU Review.
Yeah, we got a fun one. We're still in the middle of our few weeks here looking at Static Shock episodes, and much like with every non-Batman show that we look at, we don't generally look at these in exact order. We just kind of jump around and find some episodes that we think are fun or interesting or what have you, and I think we have one that qualifies for that in the Static Shock category today.
That's right. As we talked about on last week's episode, which was the first episode of Static that we covered, we mentioned that we were going to be covering this one, which at the time, Liam, I remember when this was premiering how exciting it was because it was some new Batman material mixed in with Static. It was the first confirmation of Static being in the DCAU. And it's a fun little episode. You know, you get the Joker coming to town. He is the main villain. But before we jump into plot, I assume that you have, as the tradition we've started a few months back, of you reading the IMDb synopsis for this week's episode.
I, of course, do. And this is for The Big Leagues, written by Len Yulee and directed by David Chlistic. I'm probably butchering that. I apologize. But anyway, that synopsis reads as such. Static's enemies team up with the Joker and run amok throughout Dakota. And where there's the Joker, the dynamic duo can't be far behind.
There we go. And that's just not a teaser, folks. That's for sure what happens. The dynamic duo does indeed show up. Liam, so let's jump into plot. The plot here, we have the Clown Prince of Crime shows up and aids in the escape of one of the Bang Babies. As we mentioned last week, that is the name that the unfortunate name that all of the villains end up getting classified as. They're not super villains. They're not metahumans. They're Bang Babies.
Correct.
So one of the Bang Babies who looks like a rat, or I guess his name is Ferret, I think.
Yes.
He's running amok through what appears to be a farmer's market, which is how you know that we're not in Gotham. You know that you're not in Gotham when the villain is destroying a farmer's market. So he's escaping Static and gets aided in his escape by a man that has some balloons who lures him into the sewer, which is a pretty cute nod to the Stephen King's It, I guess.
Ooh, yeah. That's topical right now that the second movie just came out.
I know. Synergy right there. Product placement, even, if you will. Crossover. Yes, that's right. So we have the Joker, of course, then shows up and reveals his diabolical plan that he's recruited a lot of Static's rogues to be his henchmen.
Yeah,
sort of, essentially. Which I don't know, Liam. So we'll start with your thoughts on the plot, and then I'll throw my 2 cents in here. What were your general feelings beyond this? Because the dynamic duo, of course, is then brought in, and they help Static foil the Joker and his plot, which ended up being stealing fire trucks.
Well, I guess that's I'll get my nitpicks out of the way, because I do generally think this is a pretty fun episode. But yeah, it's not exactly clear, was Joker gonna take all of these guys back to Gotham with him? Like, if Batman and Robin don't show up, was he just gonna live in Dakota from here on out? It's not exactly clear what the further plan was, besides from recruiting Hot Streak and Shiv and Kangor and Talon to be his new henchmen. Beyond that, as you said, they steal a fire truck, which they then use for a death trap catapult thing. And aside from that, they rob a bank at one point. but it's not exactly clear to me whether or not there was like a further plan beyond just, I guess, causing some mayhem. I don't know if there's, if there was a plan. Maybe that could have been handled in dialogue if he was mentioning he was gonna, go back to Gotham and take the fight to Batman from there, or what his plan was before Batman and Robin came to him. But
well, as Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker once stated, does he look like a guy with a plan? Maybe that was the point. He didn't have a plan. But yeah, you would figure there would have been. He has a throwaway line where he mentions that his old gang got thrown in the clink by Batman, and he had heard about these super powered baddies and decided to come to Dakota to see what all the fuss was about, or something like that. That's the general explanation of why he shows up to Dakota.
Yeah, and Batman has a line where he's like, the message, because he leaves a message, I think, on ferrets after, Joker gasses him and leaves him to be found by the police. And Batman takes that message to mean he's bored and he's looking for a new challenge or something. But, it's not a, I don't think anyone was going to win an Emmy Award for the scripting here.
Sure.
But I do think there are elements of it that are cool. I like the idea of Joker kind of taking all of these impressionable young villains under his wing. We see him do that in a Justice League episode that we haven't yet reviewed, but we will, I'm sure, someday. Wild Cards, where he does this with the Royal Flush Gang. But I think the idea of him, that's a very Joker thing, is that he attracts these very kind of vulnerable and damaged people who are kind of willing to then go to war for him. Obviously the most obvious example being Harley or something like that. But so I think that's an interesting idea. And the basic idea of the Gotham people kind of underestimating the Dakota crew on both sides, like Batman and Robin kind of get ambushed by all of Static's villains and captured, and then at the end, it's the Joker who just decides not to bother capturing Static, and then Static is able to kind of figure out where they are and save Batman and Robin, and they're able to take them all down together. So I like that basic idea of how it's like kind of on both sides, the big stars from Gotham kind of underestimate the Dakota people a little bit, and then they all kind of and Static kind of earns Batman's respect at the end. So yeah, like I said, it's not the deepest plot we'll talk about in any of these shows, but it's not Citizen Kane.
It's not Citizen Kane, right?
Correct. It's not Heart of Ice. It's not something like that. But it's fine. I gave plot 6 out of 10. I think it's good. I don't think it's, like I said, I don't think it's great. It's not super deep, but I think it's a fun plot, and there are good elements in there.
Okay, I'm right around there. I gave it a 5 out of 10, which certainly isn't a knock, as you said, on the fun factor, I would say, of the episode. It's just there are some plot holes. I feel at times they did a very good job, I feel like, of not undermining Static completely, because this is Static's show. So you don't want it to be that, Static can't handle this, so Batman has to come in and save his bacon. But at the same time, Static also shouldn't be shown on the level of Batman. So I think they do a good job of balancing that. Batman doesn't need Static's help to simply defeat the Joker. On his own. It's because Batman and Robin got overpowered by these metahumans that had powers that they weren't familiar with, and overpower them and ambush them. So I think they did a good job at that, but I feel like on the flip side of that, while the Static's rogues do get their time to shine in that scene where they attack Batman and they're the ones that capture him for the Joker, they are just glorified lackeys, which takes, obviously this is only the second episode of Static that we've reviewed, but these guys are supposed to be legitimate threats to Static. These are supposed to be rogues. Right. And it kind of just puts them in the back seat. You even have where the title of the episode comes from. One of the Bang Babies is trying to resist joining the Joker, or is sort of airing his thoughts of opposition, of being a member of the Joker's gang, and he says, "Oh, come on, man! Now this is the big leagues, like
right."
Like, oh, so what you're doing as villains, you're not real villains. You're just kind of like junior members of the villains. Which,
right.
even though in the grand scheme of the DCAU, if you're self-aware, yeah, they're definitely junior villains. They're not on the same level as a Lex Luthor or a Brainiac or a Darkseid or, even probably Dr. Polaris or Golden Face. Even they're probably several or Golden Face. They're probably several rungs below them. But at the same time, I think that the hallmark of a villain sometimes is the hubris to believe that they are capable of ending the world, or they're the biggest threat. They're the biggest threat in any room they walk into. So for them to sort of be relegated and accept the fact that they were, glorified lackeys was I think a misstep and maybe detracted a little bit and made them feel like also rans.
That's fair. There's a little bit of, I think, when in the final fight with where Hotstreak and Kangor are sort of arguing over which one of them is going to kill Batman, and that sort of allows him to take them both out pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit of that, those egos coming into play. But yeah, for the most part, they are pretty much subservient to the Joker immediately. And other than with Ferret in that little scene that you mentioned, we don't really even see how he recruited them, or the rest of the crew are already with him when we first see the Joker again. So yeah, there's some steps missing maybe in explaining just how he was able to get them all over on his side, other than the fact that they're just young and impressionable and like you said, like they say in the episodes, that this is like a real big time supervillain, which you're right. When on another episode after this, if Hotstreak or Kangor is the main villain of the episode again, you're like, man, I saw Robin beat this guy up in like 2 minutes. Why is Static having to fight this guy like 6 times before he can catch him?
Yeah.
It's a fine line there. And I think that always happens when you do like groups of villains that have been main villains on other episodes. Because eventually you only have so much time, and they're always going to have to sacrifice a little bit of their screen time and their uniqueness, I think, to be part of a group.
Fair enough. All right, let's move on, Liam, let's jump to music, actually. Music in this episode, for me, the highlights were the cues of the Batman theme that snuck in there a few different times.
Yeah, they went with the Danny Elfman theme rather than the Shirley Walker theme, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, it was, and it's played not with your typical strings or orchestral type music. It's done in the same Vogue sort of I guess it's a keyboard that made a sound with an electric type sound that a keyboard would have, maybe electric organ or something like that comes through. So it is definitely unique, and you said it is as you said, it's the Danny Elfman theme as opposed to the Shirley Walker theme, which was a little bit, I would say, jarring at times, but it was still cool that they were able to at least use that. One of the things that we nitpicked, if you go back and listen to our Justice League episode of Secret Invasion, which you can hear in the archives at DCAU. Sorry, what did I say? Secret Invasion?
Secret Invasion was the Marvel Comics event of about 12 years ago.
Oh boy, it's late. Secret Origins, rather. Secret Origins, no Skrulls in this one.
No, that we know of.
That we know of, right? Secret Origins, if you go back and listen to that, again, available in the archives at DCAUreview.com. One of the things I nitpicked was that they did not use the Batman theme. The Batman theme wasn't used at all. And I would have killed to have even the Danny Elfman theme, I think, in that episode to make an impact. So it was cool that they were able to slip that in there. And it's cool when Batman and Static are teaming up and you hear it as he's running into battle to hear it. I gave it an overall score of 5 out of 10, just because I don't think that nothing else made too much of an impact for me. There was some good background music during the fighting, and I think in the scene where they robbed the bank, there was some generic rock music. But other than that, nothing really made too much of an impact for me. So 5 out of 10. What about you?
I'm a little bit stronger. I went 7 out of 10. This is also, since we're in season 2 now, we have the second of 3 Static Shock main themes. This is the straight up Run DMC ripoff theme. and I enjoyed that, and that kind of plays throughout some of the action beats with Static as well. I like that song, and I enjoyed the Danny Elfman theme. Hearing that and hearing it sort of, as you said, played on there's like a lot of, I think, keyboard and whatever, the more electronic sounding was a really interesting idea. So not a ton other than that, but I did think for the most part the music added a lot more than it took away, whereas last week it just kind of was just there. So I enjoyed the music on this show.
Okay. All right, let's move on to our next category, Liam, which is animation and visuals. So I mentioned before we started recording that I felt that this was a major upgrade over the very first episode that we watched. I would compare the animation in this episode to probably that of, or maybe slightly better than an episode of The Tick. That's what I compare it to, which The Tick is a fine animated series, near and dear to our hearts, much appreciated, very underrated, but it's definitely not on the same level as Batman animated series or any of the other fine DCAU programs. So it's still lagging behind. There's still, I think, some missteps in this episode. Do you have any general thoughts on animation yourself?
Not much beyond that. I think that's a good point. I do think the animation was much better. I also think, as far as the just general look of this show, a lot of this episode takes place at night. So I think, and I always think, you can hide a little bit of, as far as character designs and things like that goes, and some of your animations can be hid a little bit better if the palette's a little darker and there's more shadows. We've talked about that with Justice League and other shows before, so this is not necessarily unique in that way. But I definitely think this episode had much more of a unique feel to it. As far as other visual things, the entrance of Batman and Robin into the episode is really, really cool. You just hear Batman speaking from off screen, and then you just see their silhouettes in the shadows, and then lightning strikes behind them, and then it goes back to the shadow. It's really, really cool. Get to see the original. Speaking of weird design choices, we see the original Batman the Animated Series Batplane for some reason.
I was about to ask you about that. Yeah, what your thoughts on why they chose the BTAS version of the Batplane, and B, is it better than the new Batman Adventures Batplane?
I think it's a more memorable design than the new Batman Adventures Batplane. I was never super jazzed about either version of the Batplane, especially in the original Batman the Animated Series, just because it's such a grounded and gritty show, and then Batman's flying around in what basically looks like a flying saucer. Always feels like it's kind of a weird thing. So it definitely fits better in these newer episodes, I think, than and it's a more visually interesting thing. One of the things that interested me is there's a part where the Batplane is descending and a hatch opens up underneath, much like the Batman Beyond Batmobile, and it's all red on the inside. And Batman and Robin are standing up, and they jump out of it. I'm trying to figure out where they were in the plane because I'm trying to figure out do the seats recline and retract, and then they stand up where they were standing? Because it doesn't seem like that Batplane cockpit is big enough for them to be fully standing around to make their dramatic entrance into that scene. But
it's funny that you mention that, because one of the big issues that I had with this episode was there were some perspective problems. That one leads to that one, because you're absolutely right. They were super tiny coming out of that thing, as if they were falling out of a Star Destroyer or an actual jet fighter or an actual 747 or something if they were jumping out of. Clearly that's not what the Batplane is. The Batplane is a 1-person or 2-person jet that is big enough to fit that person and just happens to have wings. Like it's pretty much like an Air Force, an Air Force pilot in a plane. You're not going to stand up inside an Air Force jet. There's not enough room for you to walk down. Like, you don't get out of the seat and then walk down and go down to where the engine room is. Like, there's not room. There's not rooms in those air fighters or fighter jets. So yeah, I would concur with that. I think that the choice to go with the Batman animated series Batplane sort of fit, for me at least, because it seemed that whoever the artist was on this episode did a job. Like, it looked like they had taken character models or really studied Batman the animated series, the original, because even Robin's hair at times kind of looks like the Dick Grayson model from Batman the animated series. Mm-hmm. There were issues too with Robin's height. Sometimes he was up around Batman's shoulders. Sometimes he was shorter than Static. There was perspective issues with that too. Anyway, but whoever initially looked at it at least modeled them really similarly after the original Batman animated series models, but then also looked at the new Batman adventures and sort of did like this meld between the two of them. Mm-hmm. So, there are scenes where, if you remember, and we haven't reviewed any episodes of the new Batman adventures yet, but we did do World's Finest, but Batman had little or no details on his face. I noticed in one of the closing scenes, Batman has some lines on his face that were reminiscent of the Batman animated series. Mm-hmm. But I think the visuals were combined between the two of these, but I don't necessarily think that was a good thing.
Okay.
What did you give a score for animation visuals?
I gave it a 7 out of 10. I generally enjoy most of the fight scenes. I think are well done. Seeing Batman and Robin mix it up with these super colorful Static villains, I think is fun. And I like the way that all of the Static villains' powers are visualized. I think Shiv is it's just a guy with knives for hands. Like, on paper, that's not like a super exciting power, but the big glowing purple knife hands, I think, is a really cool look. It is interesting. You mentioned Robin being sort of inconsistently sized in this episode, because they make a point of even saying, there's a line that Robin has about how he doesn't want to be called the Boy Wonder anymore because he's getting too old for it. So, but certain times to me, he looked at the same size, if not maybe smaller than he did in the new Batman, in some episodes of the new Batman adventures. So, I think the inconsistency hurt this. I think this could have been closer to a perfect score if some of those inconsistencies weren't there. I still generally think it's a pretty fun episode. Like I said, because of the fight scenes, seeing some of the background stuff too, I thought was cool. Like in Joker's office, he has the photo of Harley, and he has a number one boss mug or something on his desk, which I thought was cool. I thought some of the environments, some of the backgrounds were cool, because it's just like a sewer and kind of some generic like warehouse type looks. But I thought they did a pretty good job of trying to make those kind of old hat generic villain hideouts have a little bit more personality than usual. So yeah, I gave it 7 out of 10. A good outing, but certainly not perfect.
I'm right there, very similar. Tick lower, went 6 out of 10. Now, I explained some of those reasons why I felt like it fell short. I think that it's certainly a major improvement over last week's episode where I gave it a 2 out of 10.
Sure.
So I'm definitely looking forward to some of these episodes moving forward. And again, as we head towards season 3, which we'll talk about our next couple episodes as we get towards the end of the program. But definite improvement, but still missed the mark on a couple places. So Liam, let's tackle our final category of the day. Final category will be, of course, voice actors. And, of course, we have quite the variety of people here, as you sort of alluded to at the beginning of the episode. Some longtime favorites and professionals here. before you get into the I'll let you get into our players here. The only thing that I will mention about that is no. Let me go ahead and introduce the players, and then I'll give my 2 cents. How about that?
Okay, fair enough. So we have a pretty sizable cast. You had all of the regular Static villains, as we mentioned in the episode. You had Danny Cooksey back as Hot Streak. You had Phil Lamar pulling double duty as Kangor. You have Tia Texada as Talon. You had Brian Tochi as Shiv, and Chick Venera as Ferret. And then, as I mentioned, Phil Lamar, of course, being the main Static Shock, the main character of the episode. You had Jason Marsden briefly in there as Richie, but perhaps for the best, his interactions were kept to a minimum in this episode. And then we had our big time guests. We have, of course, Eli Marenthal playing Tim Drake Robin in this episode, who folks would probably know when he was a younger lad as the voice of Hogarth Hughes in The Iron Giant.
Oh, yeah.
He also voiced... Yes, absolutely. Also voices Robin in the Mystery of the Batwoman movie a couple of years ago.
I didn't realize he reprised the role. That's cool.
Yeah. I think the next time Robin is on an episode of Static Shock, it's not him, but here in Mystery of the Batwoman, he's the slightly older version of Tim Drake. And then we have, of course, Kevin Conroy's Batman the Goat. Not a ton new to report on the Kevin Conroy file. Still real good, and I think he does a good job there. He's just there to be Batman, and I like the interactions between him and Static. I think they're really fun. And of course, we have Mark Hamill's Joker. He's delightful as always. And yeah, that pretty much rounds out our usual players here. I guess big picture, what were your voice acting thoughts?
I think it's, of course, when you have all these professionals, people have been doing it for a long time around, it's hard not to say, oh, well, they're the GOAT, they're the best. My only thoughts on this, I felt like when it came to Batman, it felt almost like his audio, it wouldn't surprise me to learn that he didn't record this the way that they classically did it, which was with everybody in the room at the same time. Right. At times it felt like that they were canned responses, that they were sort of isolated or taken out of context and placed in there, like they had taken bits and pieces from other places and made Kevin Conroy say things because they didn't want to bring him in. Like, that's obviously not what happened, but that's the general feel of it. I don't think it was bad. I think it has something to do also with the tone of Static overall. And then you have this dark, brooding Kevin Conroy Batman voice come in and go along with Phil Lamar's sort of goofy, not really serious portrayal of Static at the same time. It's a weird mashup between the two. The Joker, of course, the Joker's performance is always great, but I felt like they almost put reins on the Joker in this episode, in that he never quite loses his mind. He doesn't have that one moment where his laugh is just out of control. That moment that we talk about in each and every Joker episode where we're like, well, that's it. There's the Joker laugh that we all know and love. There's the signature laugh that is like unlike any other laugh that he's ever done. Yeah, it just seemed like a little bit of a muted performance on both of their parts. I don't think it was from lack of effort. I think it was just, it has something to do with it being dropped into this sort of new and different type of cartoon, I guess, is I guess how I could make it feel. So I don't think it was bad. It definitely, you're not going to never hear me say that it was a bad Kevin Conroy performance or a bad Mark Hamill performance or even a bad Phil Lamar performance. But I think it's a weird combination of the three of them. And at times it felt muted or sort of out of place. I gave voice acting 6 out of 10.
I'm a little stronger than that. I generally really enjoyed this. I gave it 8 out of 10. I do agree. And Kevin Conroy would have been in production. I mean, Justice League would have been in production. I think it was already airing because I believe this episode premiered in January of 2002. And so Justice League premiered at the end of 2001. So he very well may have had to come in and record. Him and or Mark Hamill may have had to come in and record separately from the rest of the cast. I'm sure that happened from time to time when you're doing a guest spot on what is not your regular show.
Oh, for sure.
So that certainly could be part of it. I generally do think I really enjoyed the interactions between Static and Batman and Robin. I think that's an interesting dynamic. Just and some of the real basic stuff, like they're like looking at Ferret's shoes and like doing detective work, and Batman and Robin kind of to do so. He was dragged. He wasn't carried, or he didn't walk here on his own. And Static was, oh yeah, obviously. Like I like some of that stuff where you can tell he's trying not, where Static is very clearly trying not to let on just sort of how out of his depth he feels in the moment. And so I generally think everybody did a pretty good job. I liked the interactions between Static and Robin. I kind of wish there was just a Static and Robin episode somewhere in this series. I think
I agree.
Maybe, and later on I think it's in the next Batman episode, there's a mention of the Titans, and we never get to see exactly who is on the DCAU version of the Titans. So I was like, yeah. Maybe there could have been at some point an idea somewhere or a pitch somewhere where Static and this Tim Drake Robin were part of the DCAU version of the Titans. That might have been cool to see, but yeah, as it stands, I think it's generally pretty good, and I think the voice acting for the most part, other than some of the stuff that you mentioned, I think it was really strong.
There you go. All right, well, from time to time, we do lightly disagree here. I don't know that anything required the disagreement alarm today, but, from time to time, we will disagree on things here or there. So it's refreshing. The last couple of weeks, we've actually disagreed a little bit on quite a few. So I think that brings us to our final scores for the day. So, Liam, totaling up everything from my end here, we end up with a total score of 22 out of 40. What about you?
Yeah, and I'm a little bit higher on the scale there, 28 out of 40.
There you go. Well, either way, we're both higher than we did last week. So this is a vast improvement over last week's episode. And I guess we could talk rewatchability, Liam. I think, for me at least, if you're going to point out some episodes of Static to watch, we talked about last week, hey, this is an introduction. It's not pivotal necessarily to watching it, but hey, if you're going to watch episodes, you might as well throw in the premiere episode. For me, this is a fun episode. Again, just because the score was what it was doesn't mean that this was not a fun episode to watch. Even though the plot,
to get through.
Yeah, it barely felt like a 20. It's 21 minutes or 22 minutes, whatever it is, and it doesn't drag at any point. So I would give this the thumbs up to go ahead and watch again, or watch recommendation to watch through it. What about you?
Yeah, and obviously this is Static's first meeting with that larger DC animated universe, and we talked a little bit last week about how it kind of felt at the start that they didn't know yet that it was going to be part of the DCAU. And in fact, that's true, because apparently in one of the early episodes that it was edited out on reruns, but there's some line in one of the very early episodes about Clark Kent. So in like a context of like knowing that he's Superman. So that ended up getting edited out for reruns, I think. So this is obviously kind of a big moment and a big reset for the show by establishing that it is part of this continuity, and you have the Joker, who's we didn't really talk about his design, but it's right out of the Return of the Joker flashbacks and how he looks on Justice League, and so it's an important episode, I think, because obviously there are more DCAU team ups for Static, and as we mentioned, Static shows up in Justice League as well, so. I think it's for the simple fact that it's a fun episode, and for the fact that it's the first meeting of these Static characters with these these larger DC heroes. I think I definitely think it's a thumbs up for rewatchability.
For sure. All right, Liam. So that will bring us to the end of this week's episode. We appreciate everybody for tuning in and giving us a listen. Liam, you got a preview for next week's episode for the good listeners at home?
Yeah, so we did a poll, and we had thrown a couple ideas around, but we didn't really have a concrete idea. So I threw up a poll on Twitter. Appreciate it. Got a lot of feedback on it. And the winner of that poll...
Live reveal right here, folks.
Yes, I'm pulling it up on Twitter, so I don't want there to be dead air, so I'm just going to keep rambling here.
By the way, while he's pulling that up, don't forget you can follow us on Twitter at DCAU Review. Liam's on there. Does a great job of running our Twitter page. You can always interact with him. He tweets out, of course, the brand new links when episodes drop. He also talks throughout the week, discusses fan theories. Saw some discussion this week regarding some pretty interesting stuff with the static timeline, where that falls in with the DCAU, who the Titans were, some stuff working with, talking about some of the stuff that the Watchtower database worked on. So always some good conversations to be had over there.
Definitely. And I will reveal the results of our poll here. The winning episode is the episode Sons of the Fathers.
There you go.
So that is, I think this is an episode that a lot of people who have watched this series remember. It involves very, very serious real-world topics, and it will be an interesting one to review, where I believe that's back in season 1, so it may not be the strongest from a visual standpoint. We'll see, but looking forward to it. I hear a lot of great things about this episode. I believe I maybe saw it once on Kids WB back in the day, but have not rewatched it in several years now. So that is the one that won the poll, and that's the one that I heard the most passionate arguments for on our Twitter this week. Had a few other options in the poll, which I'm sure we'll review next time we come back to Static. But for next week, it'll be the episode Sons of the Father.
There we go. And we are looking forward to that. Next week will be the final episode of Static for the month. We'll kick off the new month of October. We'll reveal what we're covering then on next week's episode. But until then, I am Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we will talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.
Shot to your system. Static shot!